This show is intended for all audiences, but some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener caution is advised.
You're listening to The Quest, Advancing the Art of Role-Playing, the show where we talk about role-playing in all of its forms, from tabletop to LARP and even cosplay. This is where we offer tips and tricks to role-players, new and old, hero or GM, and where we share our passion for role-playing and collaborative storytelling with you. The Quest is a proud member of the Dancing Giraffe Productions Network. You can learn more about Dancing Giraffe Productions at dancinggiraffe.net, and is brought to you in part by Geek Fan Expo, uniting geeks September 5th, 6th, and 7th, 2014 at the Doubletree Hotel in Dearborn, Michigan. You can find GFX on the web at www.geekfanexpo.com or on Facebook and Twitter at GeekFanExpo. Additional funding for the show is provided by MI Techmedic. That's mitechmedic.com. Brown Coat Convention Photography on Facebook at Brown Coat Photography and on Twitter at Brown Coat Photo. And by the support of listeners like you. You can follow me, your host, on Twitter and Facebook at IRNerdivore, or you can email the show at thequest@dancinggiraffe.net. And now, thank you for joining us on The Quest.
Hello and welcome to episode number, I think we're on 3 for The Quest. We're going to go over a few things today. We want to talk about characters and parties for this show.
But before we get to that, we're going to have a little bit of news. This is a new segment we call The Quest for News. Here's Laura Marsh.
From TabletopGamingNews.com, Gamer Nation Studios has announced that they will publish a new role-playing game titled Tall Tales. Tall Tales will use the new Triple Threat system, a narrative die-rolling system that has been in development for over 4 years and is currently in playtesting. Tall Tales is set in the American frontier that never quite was, where folklore and legend fueled the stories of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox, Pecos Bill, and the king of the wild frontier, Davy Crockett. Players will build their American heroes to join the fray against varmints and critters as well as villains led by the Commodore of Crime, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Tall Tales is billed as a yarn-spinning game that relies on players' fame and notoriety to establish themselves as true American heroes. You can find out more at www.talltalesrpg.com or Gamer Nation Studios site at thegamernation.org.
Yeah, it looks like a fun game to me. I'm looking forward to giving that one a shot.
It seems like a really original concept. I don't know that I've seen anything like it before.
I think it'll be a nice, refreshing thing.
From L5R.com, Q Workshop, in cooperation with Alderock Entertainment Group, proudly announces new official dice sets for Legend of the Five Rings role-playing game. In total, they sum up to 9 clan designs and 1 special set for the Imperial families. Each dice set contains 10 D10 dice in the clan color with the clan symbol engraved instead of the highest number. The dice will also be available for preview on August 15th at Gen Con 2013 in Indianapolis, USA, and will be on sale shortly after. These are super cool.
Yeah, I like them. The only thing I don't like, I think, is that the dragon dice aren't green, and they made it the mantis instead.
Yeah.
The colors look a little off on some of the clans, but other than that, they look nice.
Yeah.
Margaret Weis Productions has announced a new Firefly game and a Gen Con 2013 exclusive limited edition print title that will include a comprehensive preview that will be expanded upon and published in the upcoming Firefly role-playing core rulebook. This limited edition Gen Con exclusive offering will contain all the basic information you need to play, plus 2 standalone adventures and stats for the Serenity Crew characters, which will also be available separately on Drive-Thru RPG as digital downloads. Fans may pre-order their copy at www.margaretweis.com and receive a 20% discount coupon for the full Firefly Core book set to release in February 2014.
Yeah, it looks freaking awesome. It's the Cortex system, but it's an updated version of it, I guess. The book retails right now, the Gen Con package retails at margaretweis.com for $29.99.
Looks nice. I really hope that the updated system is better than the original one for the Serenity.
Yeah, everything I've heard, it's much more streamlined. It's called Cortex Plus, and it's much more streamlined.
Other than that, I mean, you really can't go wrong with Firefly. So
yeah. All right, that's our news for today. We'll have more every show, hopefully, with any luck, assuming we can remember to actually write the stuff. Again, I'm joined by Evelyn, Brandon, and Laura. I'm, of course, your host, Jeff. We talked about, they were on my crew from last time, so you should be familiar with them by now. Hopefully you're not too sick of their voices or mine. We're going to start today with talking about alignments and archetypes for characters in parties. We can definitely talk about everybody's favorite thing or least favorite thing in D&D and other games, which is alignment.
Alignments are a little tricky in some of the games. I really was a fan of the Palladium alignment system. It was not so rigid. I liked a lot of the stuff that it said characters may do this or are not likely to do this, so they weren't really locked into always doing the same thing. Generally, I would say that only like a paladin and maybe clerics should really have such a strict guideline of what they can or can't do.
Right. Yeah. Palladium had the categories of the very broad categories of selfish, good, and evil, and there were lots of subtypes of each of those. Unlike D&D, which has your very strict hard alignments, I would agree that most alignments don't necessarily need to be as hard. Unless you're a paladin. Even clerics don't even necessarily be quite as hard as they are for paladins. By the same token, when you're playing a paladin, you don't have to play lawful stupid. There's lots of ways to play each type of alignment that is much more in depth than we tend to get.
Alignments just seem like something that is unnecessary for someone who's a good role player. It just seems like an unnecessary complication.
When I think of alignments, D&D is the first thing that comes to mind, and I hate them. I feel like I'm tripping over myself trying to roleplay my character according to my alignment.
I guess it depends on if like in other games, what you look at as the alignment.
Lots of games have it. I mean, D&D, World of Darkness, DC Heroes, GURPS, Palladium, Star Wars.
Right, because the alignments, what it's basically the alignments in WOD are actually pretty good, because what are those called? The character paths or something like that.
To me, though, I don't know. I'm a very narratist kind of GM and player, but I think that they help you build the characters that you've got and allow you to explore the character concept while staying within the rigid mentality of what that character is supposed to be for that setting.
Yeah, they generally, I think for the most part, they should be a general guideline of what your character is likely to do, but never something that your character can't do or won't do.
Right. Well, as
there,
a GM,
there may be certain repercussions for doing so, but
right. As a GM, I know that I don't really force players to stick to their alignment exactly. But if you continually go beyond what the alignment is, then you're obviously changing the character, and changing the character is an aspect to advancing the character, and your alignment can have a role in that. It's obviously, if you're a lawful good character who keeps committing neutral acts or fails to follow through on some of the lawful acts they should be going through, then it's a choice you as a player are making, but it doesn't mean that the setting isn't going to have repercussions for that action.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of that with the alignments and the actions is based on character perspective too. What one man thinks is evil is another man's good.
Sure.
If he's doing something that he thinks is for the greater good, or
it's not just perspective of the character either, or the individual. It could be perspective of the audience. In the example of Les Mis, you've got Valjean and Javert, and Valjean is obviously a good guy, but Javert is also a good guy, and I would put him in somewhere in the lawful good to neutral good kind of class. And if you didn't see Valjean's side of things, if you just saw what Javert sees during all of that, then Javert very well could be the hero. So it's a matter of not just perspective, but also character mentality.
Yeah, very true.
One of the things you can look to is, if you're also looking at the interplay of Javert and Valjean, is the way that parties, not necessarily those two are not necessarily in a party together, but the interactions between the different alignments in each party. So if you've got a paladin who is lawful good, and you've got a rogue who is chaotic neutral, or neutral good, or something like that,
or even evil wizard.
Sure, yeah, you've got or a true neutral, which is probably the most evil alignment you can have in any game. If you've got these, you've got to figure out what your alignment, what your interaction between these characters is going to be. You've got to think ahead when you're writing up your characters and building your parties, to make sure that you've got alignments that work together. Otherwise, you can end up with a lot of character conflict.
Right. If you're playing a character that, according to his or her alignment, pretty much has to kill this other character,
right,
it's a problem.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, your players with the conflicting alignments, make sure that they're solid enough players. They're going to be okay with the fact that there's going to be a lot of interplay and inter-character conflict, and one of them might wind up dead.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's good for the story, though. It makes it compelling.
Sure.
Yeah, sometimes you can you can come up with role-playing reasons to...
Yeah, you've got to be careful with that, though, because you don't want to get to the point where you're actually just making excuses not to do what your
Right.
character should be doing. The whole point of alignments in the way they interact in the situation, if you've got an evil wizard and a goblin in your party, and the goblin is technically a good guy, and you've got a paladin as well, there's only so long you can make excuses for the evil wizard doing the things he's doing, or for allowing this goblin who is technically good by goblin standards, still not probably good by human standards, but if you have these things in your party, you've got to really, you can't make excuses. At some point or another, you're going to have to come down to that alignment. That alignment and what is right for the character and right for the setting doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be right for the party as a whole.
Right.
If you've got an L5, let's say Legend of the Five Rings, if you've got a character that is a scorpion who is obviously doing things that are bad, but he's part of the party, it doesn't mean the lion character shouldn't just cut him in half. Because sooner or later, you just have to stop making that excuse. You have to forget the fact that they're your friends and that they're in your party, and remember that
He's an honorless dog that must die.
right. The setting, right. The setting dictates that you have to act, and that's, to me, that's one of the things that alignments are really good for. It's making you think beyond the notion of, well, this is what I want to do because I think it would help the party better, or because this is what I would do in the situation. You got to remember that when you're role playing, you're not playing you in that setting. You're playing this character. And the character may not have the same mentality as you, and you may not think necessarily lawful good, but if you have to stop and think real quick, wait a minute, this isn't what I'm thinking of doing right now is probably not a good act. I need to rethink that and do with a lawful good act, or at least come something closer to the lawful good act than what I was going to do. Another thing we can think about when talking about alignments is the typical alignments for different classes. Obviously, paladins they should be lawful good. I mean, I know they've got anti-paladins and blackguards and stuff, but I think that defeats the purpose of what a paladin actually is. I suppose there's arguments for it, but you've got your thieves, and what alignments do you usually use for thieves? For me, I usually use chaotic good.
Yeah.
It makes the most sense. I mean, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to have a lawful thief.
Neutral, good, or...
You could do a lawful thief.
Yeah, I mean, I
In a
guess
way.
they would have their own,
I would
if
think
they
of
have their own personal set of values or something like that.
I would put like a Robin Hood in a
Yeah.
lawful
Yeah.
category.
That makes sense.
I would think that Robin Hood is more of a chaotic, because he's working outside the law specifically.
Well, again,
for the
lawful doesn't necessarily mean that you're following the law, because sometimes the law isn't what's right. You're following a code, and you're very strictly following that code. And in the case of a lawful good, say a paladin, you're following the code of your deity to the point of you're willing to sacrifice everything you are and could be to be this, basically to be an avatar of this deity. Lawful doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to follow every single little stupid little law. It means you're going to do what is right.
Which is why I don't see necessarily a problem with an evil paladin, because if you're a paladin of an evil god.
To me, paladins are the best class in D&D to play, because there's so much more to role play with them. They're not necessarily the most powerful, but they're without question some of the best characters to role play. And if you've ever read the Brown Book AD&D Paladin book, that book gives you a story. I want to say the guy's name is Sir Richard, although I'm not 100% sure. It's been a long time since I've read it. But the story of this character in this book is so good that it made me completely rethink the way paladins work, because I'd always heard lawful stupid, and you're gonna do what the law says, no matter what is right or wrong. And paladins like that are boring. They're not fun to play. Paladins who have conflict are really good, and it fits it back into the Star Wars mentality. If you're talking about alignments, Star Wars has alignments too. Even the old D6 West End game Star Wars and the D20 Star Wars have alignment. They've got light side and dark side. That's an alignment. You're either playing a good character or you're playing a bad character. And to me, one of the things that really bothers me about modern Star Wars is the fact that it's not that anymore. Now now you have light side and dark side and middle side, and I don't like that. It's a lot of the stuff with the legacy era of Star Wars is really not good because of that. You've got middle of the ground characters who are doing evil things with the Force, as per what Lucas originally created with Star Wars, originally created. I will highlight the words originally created, and you lose a lot of that depth of conflict between Luke trying to get his father back and everything else, and having to deal with he's done some evil things, and it makes him understand his father more because he's committed some of these evil acts, and he can see how hard it is to stay away from that path and how tempting it would be to go down that road, and he has to make himself a better person because of it.
I don't know, when I was reading some of the new legacy stuff, it seemed to me that it was the character was thinking that he was walking down the middle of the road, and basically came to realize that he was kind of fooling himself, and by doing these evil acts for a so-on called good purpose, that he was still bringing himself closer to the dark side.
That's definitely possible. And that's a good element to roleplay, because you're going against your alignment then of being a light side character by doing these evil things. Even though you think you're still doing it, you've got this mentality that you're not an evil character, even though you're becoming an evil character. Which, playing evil characters in some campaigns, you can do it, but you shouldn't play an evil character in a game that is not prepared for evil characters. You should not have an evil character mixed with good guy characters.
Yeah.
Without at least the, conferring with the GM and making sure that's something that he's ready to deal with in his campaign.
Right, and being aware that, chances are if you're the sole bad guy in a party of good characters, sooner or later they're going to kill you.
Unless you get to them first, but...
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the right player in the right setting with the right GM and the right fellow players can do it, but it's
very
so
tricky.
rare that you have that perfect combination.
Yeah, we've done it a few times in my games. Jamie tends to play bad guys in pretty much every game now, which it was nice the first time I did it, and even the second time I did it in the 1L5R game, where he played a good guy who was committing sometimes evil acts, but he really was doing them for the greater good of the community. These kinds of characters can be fun to play, but don't be the guy that plays the same thing over and over like that. We're running a new Pathfinder game, and he wants to play a character that is, I don't think he wants to be evil, but I think he was talking about being a very neutral, very self-centered character. And I think that is something that is expected in my groups now. So it's not going to be a surprise to them. It's not going to bring any new storytelling elements to the story for him to do that. It's fine. I don't have a problem with it. He can still do it. I just don't think it's going to add any interesting elements to the story that we haven't already gone through. In a party, you're telling part of the story, and you want to make sure that your alignment is helping you tell that story. I mean, role-playing, again, is all about collaborative role-playing, collaborative storytelling, and it's very important to have that. It'll help you bring balance to the group, which brings us to our next category, which is the balance and unbalancing of parties. One of the things you can talk about is definitely power balance. You don't want to have characters that are extremely high level with characters who are very low level. Talking about D&D again, if you want to have a party that's 16th, 17th level and add a first level character to the group, it's not going to be fun for that low level character.
Right. It's also about not just level, but personality and motivation and such.
Adding a mentally unbalanced character to a party of balanced mentally characters is only fun when you're playing a Malkavian.
Some of it too is just a balancing of actual items or character abilities. You don't want to have one character get the ultra uber badass sword of killing everythingness while everyone else is running around with normal weapons or maybe a +1 weapon at best.
Right, the sword that heals you and resurrects you when there's no healing and resurrection in a game. Some of the things you think about when you're thinking about power balance is personality of power too. You don't want to have a character introduced into a group that is without question the main focus of that group because they've just come in. This happens a lot especially with younger players, especially when and I hate to do this because it's kind of bringing a bad light to gamers, but sometimes you have the basement dwelling nerd guy who gets his girlfriend for the first time or gets a girlfriend who's interested in gaming and she becomes the ultra hero of the party, and that really can irritate the other players. This happens in LARPs too, so make no mistake, it's not just basement dwelling nerds. Sometimes it's sun dwelling nerds. And sometimes it's forest dwelling nerds.
And it doesn't even have to necessarily be someone that they're in a relationship. Sometimes it's just someone that they want to be in a relationship with.
Yeah, that happens.
And it does get very frustrating as the other players, where you're sitting here going, I came here to play, not twiddle my thumbs. Yeah. At that point, you might as well bring out your phone and do all those bad things we told you not to do last week.
Right, and that we'll tell you not to do again in episode 5. So it's something to look out for. You want to make sure that doesn't happen. You want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to be part of the story. Another thing you definitely want to avoid, you don't want to introduce NPCs into the party that are extremely powerful. You don't want to have the cleric that's following your PCs around have 9th tier magic when your PCs are at like 2nd and 3rd tier. It adds an element of, well, it leads you into what we call the Mary Sue complex, and which is basically your character, your personification of the storyteller in an idealized form that is just, crazy. It's not an okay thing to do, and I've had GMs that do that, and I can't say that I haven't done it, but I can't recall when I have done it.
I have a couple of people that I won't game under anymore because their NPCs are either following the party or with the party and they are the hero for the entire game, or they're the NPCs that we're fighting that we just can't kill because the GM is so wrapped up in his own characters.
Yeah, that happens. That particular aspect happens a lot on LARPs as well. You'll get somebody who writes an NPC that is a plot NPC. This is the major villain, and they become so accustomed to and enjoy playing that NPC so much that I'm letting go when the PCs finally beat him. And you may be stabbed in the back with a magic dagger that kills all things, and then you're like, okay, it worked. And then 10 minutes later, you come back because, oh wait, no, I wasn't really dead. And there's a point when the storytelling becomes kind of fraudulent.
Also, becomes kind of redundant. There's been a game I played where every single major NPC is the absolute best at what they do. So if there is a smith, he can smith any metal into any weapon and make it pretty much magical. Yeah. And even though he's basically just a warrior or a fighter smith, pirate that can sail this biggest, best ship and fight the biggest, worst krakens and generally come away unscathed for the most part.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing you got to watch out for as a GM.
Yeah.
Also, balancing classes, I think, is important. I mean, what situations is it acceptable to have more than one paladin in a party?
Sure. I think it depends on what kind of story you're going for. Like for me, I think a game of all paladins and clerics could be a whole lot of fun. I designed a game a long time ago that I never ran that was clerics and paladins in a group that was using the real world deities, where it was set in and during the Crusades, and you'd have paladins and clerics on either side of the story, the Muslim and the Christian side of the story. And you could tell a very compelling story where these hero characters are clerics and paladins, and then the rest of the world is obviously, normal guys. So you've got this element of high fantasy magic in this very real setting, this very dark, heavy setting. I thought it would be a lot of fun. I never ran it because I never got the players. But a group of all wizards could be entertaining. A group of all thieves might be a little
broken.
I don't think it would be fun for very long because you'd be stealing from everybody.
Yeah, I think that's one of those last 5 or 6 sessions before everybody gets bored with it, because you're not only stealing from all of your NPCs, but you're stealing from each other.
Yeah. Plus, you don't have that balance where you're actually fighting anything. The clerics, they're the rogues wouldn't really be. They're not really combat effective characters. So if you're not running the high adventure kind of games that people tend to like in D&D.
Well, if they're multi-class, they can be very effective, especially when there's 4 of them and there's 1 or 2 NPCs that are pretty much flanked at all times, so they're getting hit with backstabs repeatedly from all sides.
Like our Conan game. Yeah. But the question there is, does that really count as all one type of alliance, or all one type of pretty balanced PCs class-wise? Because now you've got a fighter thief and a pirate thief and a mage thief, and you've all got thief elements, but now you're not really all the same. You're beginning to balance the party out some more.
Right. And I think sometimes it comes down to having a variety of personalities and motivations and such.
Right. One of the reasons I don't really care for D&D most of the time is because at least until Pathfinder, if you had 3 warriors in the group, you basically had 3 characters that were exactly the same. And unless the role players were outstanding, you really didn't have differences in the characters. It was just the same thing. Now, you can do that in other games like Legend of the Five Rings. You can all play Lion Bushi, but there's different types of Lion Bushi, and there's so many different personalities because of the advantages and disadvantages that you can add that you don't get in some games.
Some of that with the fighters can be kind of negated with specific feats specializing in certain weapons, like a fighter that's specializing completely in ranged weapons, and the bow becoming an Order of the Bow initiate, compared to the fighter that is just specializing in long sword or great sword with power, attack, cleave, and
right.
Yeah.
Prestige classes help mitigate it a little bit, but it's really still, for 12 levels, you're all the same character basically.
Right. You can't start picking up your prestige class levels until higher. higher levels.
Plus, just because you've got, a spear and this guy's got a longsword doesn't mean you're really any different. It's an abstract system in your mind. It doesn't really make a difference what weapon you're using. It doesn't change your personality, the weapon you're using necessarily.
Well, D&D is really kind of a boring system when you compare it to just about every other system anyway. Even Pathfinder gives you a lot more options. I mean, like in Pathfinder, you could have a party of fighters and have a lot more variety than in D&D.
Have actual difference in the characters.
Right.
With the archetype options especially, but you're still going to have traps explode in your face without a rogue or levels of rogue.
Sure. It depends on the GM, the way the GM is running it too. I mean, ideally in D&D type games, you've got the typical party, which is a cleric, fighter, mage, and thief. And to me, that's a very boring campaign, but it is the typical D&D campaign, and it is what you really need to have a truly quote-unquote balanced party in Dungeons & Dragons. I like games... First of all, I like games that are not D&D. World of Darkness, for an example, doesn't even give you really classes. So if you think about party balance, now you're thinking beyond the class system.
It does and it doesn't, because depending on what World of Darkness game you're playing, you have your clan or your tribe or something like that, which
right. But again,
it's not the same, but it's kind of similar.
A little, but much like L5R, you can play a band of Geos or a band of Spiral Dancers and still be varied enough with all of the advantages and disadvantages and paths.
That's true, yes.
Right. Plus, the game allows you to be more adaptive. The ability to be adaptive doesn't really exist in D&D the way it does in other games. It's a little bit more, but it's a little better in D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder, where you've got skill ranks. But in WOD and L5R and stuff, you can all play an Akodo Bushi who went to the Akodo Bushi school. You're all ranked 3 Bushi, but you've all got vastly different skills because one, first of all, your attributes are going to be different. That's going to play an effect on how you make the character, how you play the character. But you've also got the advantages and the disadvantages, and then you've got the skill trees that you can buy, the skill levels you can buy. You, Brandon, may be focusing on being a swordsman, whereas Laura is focusing on being a tactician, and Evelyn is focusing on being a bonsai tree trimmer who just happens to kick a lot of ass with her sword.
Bonsai!
And maybe she's focusing more on the courtier type stuff as a warrior.
There's definitely more option there with it, but depending on the characters and what they decide to do with, they could all be cookie cutter twins if they didn't decide to specifically branch out.
Right. I think the setting has a lot to do with it. I think first of all, the system has a lot to do with it, but I think the setting has a lot to do with it too. I think D&D has a feel to it that is very, very rigid, whereas games like WOD don't. They feel much looser, much more conducive to playing something that is not stereotypical and that is creative.
Yeah.
Moving through that, you've got the creativity of characters. Sometimes your character isn't necessarily going to be the main focus of something. You might be the sidekick. So what does it mean to you guys to play a sidekick character?
Well, not counting an actual superhero game where you're playing a sidekick to a superhero.
Sidekick.
Basically, the sidekick means that you're not necessarily the major focus of the story. You're there to help the main character out. Yes, you're a support character, like Han Solo is a sidekick to Luke.
Right, and Chewbacca is a sidekick character to Han, and the droids are sidekick characters to pretty much everybody. But granted, without these sidekick characters, like Luke couldn't have succeeded in the things he did if he didn't have Han, and he didn't have Chewie, and he didn't have Leia, and he didn't have the droids. I mean, they're an integral part of the storyline.
Yeah,
might have been able to do without Lando.
Well, there's nothing wrong with playing a sidekick character. It's just a character that is there to, support. Some characters are actually designed to be that. Like I'm designing a barbarian character for our next Pathfinder game that is not going to be one of the main heroes, really. She's going to be more of a support character.
Right. Sometimes you have the problem, too, of having a party of characters make all sidekick characters. Can be an issue.
This wasn't something that I really ever thought about until I started prepping for today's show and going back thinking, I said, I don't think I've ever played a sidekick. And it took me back to, there is a movie somewhere, and I don't remember what movie it is, but there's a conversation happening between two of the characters at one point, and one of the characters says, take a look around the room. If you can't find the sidekick, then you're the sidekick. Which I guess means I don't really mind playing a sidekick. Thinking about it more, I realized I actually do have a character in the LARP I used to play that was designed to be the sidekick. Her entire goal in life was to guard the people she was told to guard and find a particular knight that was has a lot of prowess and was very well revered, and learn under that knight and basically be his tail.
I think in LARPing, almost everybody at some point or other is going to be the sidekick character. I play a character now. Well, I played the same character for 16 years, but when you think about it, you sometimes are just the sidekick character. And for a while, I was the sidekick character. I ran an inn. For a while, I was basically an NPC. I ran the inn. I was the innkeeper. And then I moved into sidekick character, where I was apprenticing to basically one of the spy masters for the prince, and one of the the prince's personal assassin kind of thing. And then I eventually moved into my own, where I became one of the prince's spy masters and a master assassin. And now I can point out sidekicks that I have now who probably don't think of themselves as sidekicks and will eventually not be sidekicks, but I can count 6 or 7 minions that are to me sidekicks, but to them I'm sure they're not.
Well, I know I was your sidekick for a while in the LARP with my character, which was playing your brother.
Right.
And I know also I was Jamie's character's sidekick for a bit too.
Sure.
Well, he was training me up in the arts of magical healing and killing.
And when do you eventually not be when are you eventually not the sidekick anymore? When do you go from being Robin to becoming Nightwing? I mean, it's something that everybody's going to want to do at some point, and it happens. In LARPs, it's a pretty natural progression, but in a tabletop, there might have to be something that actually makes it happen.
Right. I was going to say, I think sometimes it's part of the story. Something story related will happen that can cause you to have to step up. That happened fairly literally in our L5R game a couple of times, where I think Brandon,
Derek was the leader originally.
And then his character got killed off or got dishonored or something like that.
No, he was killed. Yeah, he stood his ground when the bandits were attacking. And
died with honor.
But so he got killed off, and then somebody else had to step up. One of the sidekick characters had to step up and become the leader.
It happened to my character in the Star Wars game or Star Trek game we played for a while. Although it was intended to be that way, it was scripted that way. And I started out as a sub-lieutenant or something. I think it was lieutenant junior grade or something like that. And we played through several adventures where, unfortunately, every captain kept getting crushed by I-beams and rocks that flew out of hidden rock panel storages, and would kill the captain off or kill whatever, and I would have to take over the ship.
I actually prefer playing the sidekick character, I think.
How easy should it be to change your character from being your alignment, your party balance, your sidekicks, or really anything at all?
Well, I was looking at it like when you're making a character, you think that this will be a good idea when you are going through your thought processes. So you take this advantage or you take this flaw, depending on what your game, or this merit or disadvantage. And you start playing, and as your character is developing more through gameplay, you begin to realize that this one doesn't really fit for what you had for your character. So maybe we'll see if the GM will let me swap out this merit for this other one, or this flaw for something else that makes a little more sense for the character, now that he's actually getting more of a personality and developed beyond just the stats and name on the piece of paper.
Right, and some of that can be changed just through role-playing. You don't necessarily have to have the stats literally changed. You could role-play that you are overcoming one of your disadvantages and obstacles, and some games you can get away with just changing them. Like 7th Sea, though, is not a game that, I think in 7th Sea especially, is a game where you have to overcome it. You have to move past that disadvantage.
They have that with the Vice and Virtue, and I think that was one of the ones that I was actually thinking about, because you have the Vice where the game master plays a drama die and causes your vice to take effect.
Right.
And that's actually what I ended up changing when I was playing Sancho. I thought that the star-crossed hubris, I think is actually what they call it.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Which the game master could play, and I would fall in love with random woman that I happened to, bust through the window into her room as I was trying to escape from this or that. But it
mere moon and stars and it went away.
Yeah, exactly. But it started to come up where my character could have been infatuated a little bit, but he's not going to be falling head over heels over this chick that he just randomly bumped into every single time. So I talked with him, and I still portrayed some of that, but we ended up moving my hubris to loyalty, and that ended up working out a lot better. And I still did kind of play the star-crossed thing a little bit, but it wasn't anywhere near as severe.
Right, it's good to change your personality based on the story.
Yeah, I have my main character for the LARP I was playing is a prime example of this. She started out as a healer, almost lawful good, probably a little closer to neutral good, if we look at it alignment wise. And throughout the course of the story, she went from being a healer to being bordering on evil because of the people she fell in with, and then coming back from that a little bit, going the druid route and coming back into the good a little bit, and then due to the fact that she sometimes was lawful stupid,
Ended up sacrificing herself for the greater good.
yep,
The greater
and is
good.
now a being of light.
There's definitely things to think about when you're talking about character change. I personally think, like I said, I think that character change is important in that it should be something that you experience the change of the character and not something you should just do. You shouldn't be sitting at the table trying to figure out how to power game this or that without looking at it like how your character is getting to that point as well.
Some of that with the how easy to change your character can also go in line with playing the sidekick or no longer being the sidekick.
Sure.
As you're developing your character. And as Laura was saying that, the L5R, when Derek was the leader and he died his honorable death, and then I kind of had to step up and become the leader. I had to kind of change my personality a little bit because instead of being the tank fighter, now I'm having to
Make decisions.
Yeah.
So
Stupid
I gotta
decisions.
I gotta think about what's going to be best for my companions and myself.
And then you went and committed seppuku and left me in charge.
Yeah, not my best day. But it was an honorable death, so I can't complain about
right.
it now.
No, you got to go out with your lady. So you can't beat that. I mean, a good thing, one of the things about L5R is that I think you build towards your death. I think I look at the game totally different. I look at that game as not building your character's reputation in life and being a hero. I think it's building towards your character's ultimate death and getting the best possible death out of that game you can.
That is true.
So, honor to you and your house.
Wrong game.
Oh, yeah. No, that's Gowron. It's
but
Klingons are like samurai, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
It's a thing.
A lot.
Sure.
With lobsters on their heads.
Dressed in gold lame and lobsters on their brains. So anyways, the next thing we want to talk about today is going to be character naming. I personally think this is one of the best topics we can ever come up with because a name is a really big and important part of your character.
The name, depending on the character, is like the biggest and sometimes at the same time the least important thing. It's all a matter of what you're looking to go with it. You can just have a generic name like Bob or whatever, but then you can go with some of our amazing characters that we've had.
Like Darwin Darsh or Darksbane the Third.
By no light touch.
The Just. Yeah, and then you've got Tor, Stone Dwarf, Tor Orcrusher, and Sin the Shot, Sure Shot.
I find this subject interesting because I am horrible at naming characters, and I have never really put that much importance on it, but I've never really thought about it that much.
Rattle off your 7C character's name for me.
Oh, jeez.
Can you?
Alicia Aldana de Saldana del Castillo.
Sancho's the Peta de Soldado del Castillo. Killed my father. Prepare to die.
Sebastian Deschamps du Montaigne. But naming, I think naming is an important part of character development, character creation and development.
Oh, definitely.
Most assuredly.
I have a hard time naming them. Like, what do you guys use to? Do you just pull names out of your head?
Mostly I do, yeah.
See, I'm horrible at that.
I tend to make up names that just sound good together. I use syllable blending techniques so that it's basically like, all right, well, you say these words together, it needs to end with this letter or this many syllables, something like that. And it's just a matter of the way it sounds in my head. I'll also a lot of times use things like the character naming source book, and I'll look up what I want the character's name to mean.
That's what I usually do, but mostly it's just because I need to find a name.
Right.
I'll use like babynames.com or depending on if I made a gypsy character for the LARP, so I looked up Romanian names.
Yeah.
Sure.
The character naming source book is awesome by Sherilyn Kenyon.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that on the on
It's
the
a nice
show notes.
It's a nice book.
The 7th Sea books are really good because under each nation, under the main book, it has ideas for names. And then under each nation book, it generally also has an expanded list. So Sancho's the Peta de Soldado del Castillo.
Doesn't it also sometimes say like this nation is equivalent to this nation in the real world? So if you need names,
Yeah.
you can
Right.
look up.
Yeah, I believe it does.
When you're making characters for games like Conan and stuff, you can figure out what country they are closest to. Like the Cimmerians are very Nordic type people, but then you have the Stygians, which are obviously very Egyptian type people. So you can think of it that way and go based on the nation your character is from. I a lot of times, depending on what game we're playing, will come up with a design of what I want the personality to be and what I think that personality most likely portrays in a stereotype for a different nation. So if I'm playing a big, brutish, not necessarily overly intelligent, but still smart, thuggish kind of character, I tend to think of Russians. So I'll come up with a Russian name. I don't know why I think that. It's probably because I was raised in the Reagan era.
Some of the like character building software or whatever, it has a random character name thing.
Yeah. Sure.
And so you just flip through and you find something and you just kind of say the name out loud and see, and then you hit next and then you pick part of this name or part of this name and put them together.
Right. It's all a matter of sound in that case. Two, there's studies out there that talk about your character, your name, your personal name, changing the who you are and what you are. Aptronyms. I think it's how it's pronounced anyways. Aptronym is a psychological study, or such a psychological principle that talks about your name affecting the way you are and who you are. There's also an article by National Geographic talking about the new royal baby being named and how the royals name their children after people who they're honoring. But sometimes stupid people name their children Espen, spelled ESPN, or Jedi Knight.
That's not okay.
Which these are real names.
Or Northwest.
Or La-A-, L-A-A.
That's horrible.
And these are names that can affect your outcome in life. And there are studies out there showing now this is a thing. It's actually affecting people. Or you'll see people that have aptronyms are basically names that sound very much like your job, like the basketball player Tyrese Tallman or Tice Tallman, or Mike Blackbird, who is an Auburn Society member, or an accountant named Sandy Cash. You know, these are things that you can think about when you're making your character too. It happens a lot with elves, especially in D&D type games, where you've got your character's name is something like Lothariel Moonbeam or something, you know, or Vendagost Longleaf or something, you know.
Celerifian Longbow or Straight Arrow or
right. And it's, to me, I don't personally like those kinds of names, especially for elves. I think the names should be way more complicated.
Yeah, I actually started playing Pathfinder with you guys this week and came up with my first name. Still am stuck on the last name because all I'm coming up with are flowery elven names, and it makes me feel like a hippie.
Yeah,
my character is not a hippie in the least.
What's your character's first name?
Elysium.
And
or Alicia.
Elysium is a so it's Alicia. So why did you come up with the name Alicia?
Because for some reason the Elysian Fields were on my mind that day.
There you go. So now you go with something else that's, you know, Roman
Romanesque, you know?
Possibly. I'm also possibly thinking to check into Moorish names
Sure.
because that's her human heritage.
Sometimes you go in with the I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it's Stan Lee, where it's Peter Parker and
Right. Alliteration.
alliteration, where
Peter Parker, Silver Surfer.
there's a lot of characters there. But the one character I made for
Clark Kent.
Lois Lane.
Not Stan Lee characters, just so people don't get mad. We know they're not Stan Lee characters.
yeah, but the superhero I made for the one Aberrant game, I was trying to come up with something, so I was like, okay, what will sound good if I do this or that? So I was like, okay, I'm Marcus. Okay, all right, we'll work with that. Okay, I'm Marcus Maxwell, and so I'm the big brute guy, super strength, really hard to hurt. And so when I punch someone, boom, I'm Marcus Maxwell, bitch.
Yeah.
My name is Peter Griffin.
Yeah, Peter Griffin. Peter Griffin. What? Wrong
Mixing
character.
shows now.
For the adventure game, I created a character that was a 1930s typical Sam Spade type character. You know, the hard-nosed, gritty noir detective, and I wanted something that sounded like it would fit in that era that you would see in a Cagney movie or a Humphrey Bogart.
Right.
And someone like that could have played. And I came up with Avery Winters. And I came up with Avery. Really, Avery came about because I kept thinking of Spencer for Hire, and
Avery
I kept thinking of
Brooks.
Hawk, and I kept thinking of Avery Brooks. So I went with Avery. And then Winters, I just think Winters is a good cold sounding, not to be punny there, but a very direct, definitive, hard sound with some mysterious connotations, and that's what noir is supposed to be about. Is that mysterious, hard-nosed stuff, and I think the name fit really well.
Now, I've never actually came up with a name first. Like, I find that to be an interesting concept of coming up with a name and then designing a character around it.
Actually, about half the time, I think I come up with a name first, or I come up with I can visualize an appearance of the character. It comes back to what I talked about in one of the other episodes, where I tend to create characters based on photos and pictures. Well, I can name the character, and then I can come up with more of a personality based on their name. Somebody who's named Maxwell Mannheim is probably a very smart character who's also kind of thuggish. For some reason, Mannheim Steamroller comes to mind. I think Steamroller. I think Mannheim equals Steamroller. So
Word association.
it's word association, really. A lot of it. It's Rorschach's for my brain. I really enjoy making characters, though. I think it's good stuff, and I think naming your character is extremely important. And you know, don't name your character something stupid. Name your character something that's going to make sense. We've had characters in our games whose names have been Bob, and really, that's fine if you're playing a modern game. But I'm pretty sure we were playing Star Wars, so
or something. Yeah.
something that
I generally try to avoid something that's too simple. Some of my more common names have been either for the Star Trek game or, like I said, Marcus Maxwell for the Aberrant game. It was the modern era, like Sin the Shot, Sure Shot, or...
Sure, but those names didn't, like the Sure Shot and the Just and Stone Dwarf, those didn't start out as character names. They were names
Not
that
fully.
we acquired during the game.
Well, Sin, it kind of started out as Sin Sure Shot. He was an elf. The concept behind him was he was a rogue, and he was very good with any kind of ranged weapon. And as we started playing a bit, I think part of it was because of the Attitude Era of wrestling. That
Oh,
we
yeah,
were
no,
fans
absolutely.
of. Definitely, actually, not part of it. It was definitely part of that.
Right.
Is like, okay, we decided we needed something with a little more personality for our characters, so Sin became Sin the Shot, Sure Shot.
Right. I think mine is the only one that wasn't based on a wrestler originally. It didn't have wrestler connotations, although it sounded like it did. But I was playing a character, I was Binor Light Touch, the Just. But I didn't start out with the Just. I was just a cleric who was a zealot, to the point of, going back to alignments, I don't think I played my alignment at all. Because I ended up being kind of an evil character in the point of being so zealotous in my belief, in my faith, and my hatred of certain things like
Slavery.
like slavery, particularly because the character started out as a slave, half-elf slave. And at one point we were standing in a slave market in a village that was, or in a city that, and the slave market was going on behind, and I heard someone bidding, and it was my former slave owner. So I turned around, and the PCs all asked me where I was going, and my only response was to trample out the evil. At which point I walked down into the middle of the crowd of this giant city, this hundreds of thousands of people city, and I beat a man to death with my holy symbol. And it was justice. This man deserved the punishment he got. And my theory, my thoughts behind it as the character were, if my God didn't want me to do it, he'd take away my power. He wouldn't have blessed me with these gifts if he didn't want me to have them to do the things that I'm doing. The character ended up heading towards the evil route, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely
Sounds like it.
was walking a fine line.
A
with
very
that.
fine line.
There was a couple times when that was also when I was playing Sin, and there were a few times when I thought that you might actually turn that holy symbol onto me.
There were a couple times I would have. That comes back down to the making excuses for your party. Binor didn't do some of the things that the first notion that came to my mind was crush Sin's face with his holy symbol because he's stealing stuff. But then I realized that he's taking things. I was able to rationalize it as the character as he's taking things from evil people. They don't need them because they're evil people. He's doing the just thing in this situation.
And I did make sure to donate to your temple
Right.
generously.
That was a mandatory.
Generously.
Binor was a fun character, and I've actually wanted to play characters like him again. I created a character in a D&D 4th edition game that was a female version, very similar. I was trying not to go quite as Zealotous. Binor didn't start out as a Zealotous character. He was originally, I had him just being a warrior cleric who, through the means of role-playing and through character alignment shifts and through party storytelling and things like that, ended up becoming this character that earned the moniker the Just. And I think at least partially the moniker the Just was somewhat facetious in that some of the things I did were definitely not necessarily legally just. But
I seem to remember you going to question a peasant about something, and he didn't give an answer fast enough, so you crushed his skull.
that was one of the things that I did in the game that I look back on, and it's one of the mistakes that I made as a character.
Kind of, but then immediately you grabbed the guy, dragged his body to
Yes.
the nearest temple, and then paid
had
to
him
have him
resurrected.
resurrected.
And then I questioned him again. Although I got the answer the second time. I think he just made up an answer, but I got the answer the second time.
Well, these are the types of characters that the names become a part of the character.
Sure.
And I think a well-named character, that does happen. And one of my problems is that I usually just pick a name that I like the way it sounds, but it doesn't have any real meaning.
Sure.
And so I find myself having to look at my character sheet to figure out what the name of my character is. You know, somebody asks me what my name is, and I go,
Yeah, see, I almost never have that problem. I usually know my name. Again, it comes back to the antronyms and whatnot. There are people in the world who have gotten names like Stallion and Yeah Detroit and Fish and Chips and Number 16 Bus Shelter, and these are real names that have been outlawed in New Zealand because they've been used. Or you think of like
I love that they had to outlaw those
yeah,
names.
they can't use the story in the National Geographic article is actually the judge renaming someone's child because they're like, you're bad parents. I'm changing this child's name because you're bad parents. You did not think this out when you named your child.
And New Zealand isn't the only country that's done that.
No, not at all.
I'm a huge addict of crack.com, which has very informative, educational, hilarious, and not safe for work articles. And they did an article on like the 5 stupidest things people have done in naming children or something like that. And they talked about a couple of countries that have strict naming guidelines. One actually has a list. Like you can name your child these things.
Yeah.
That might be going a little far.
That may be a little far. But then you get guys like Frank Zappa who named their children, Moon Unit and Dweezil.
Right.
So, or Gwyneth Paltrow, who's named her kids Apple and Moses. Kanye and Kimmy.
Moses is at least a real name.
I can dig on Moses, just like Zappa's children's also he's got a kid named Hamet and Diva. Diva's not a great one, but Hamet is not a bad name necessarily. It's an Egyptian god.
Yeah.
So some of the unusual American names that have come out for girls in 2012 included Jaeger, Couture, Excel, Yoga, and Sanity. And according to baby.com, some of the boys' names that have been listed as, bad names are Vice and Xenon, like the processor, Mango, Drifter, and Hippo. Unless your child,
Why?
unless
Why
your child
would you
is
name
like,
your child Hippo?
unless your child is born 800 pounds.
Mango.
Why would you?
Your child will be haunted by SNL their entire life.
Yeah, it's a mango.
That's true. But the name Hippo, you're just going to you're
Your child isn't
automatically
fat.
giving them confidence issues.
I don't know. There's things that you should not name your children. There are things you should not name your characters. And you got to think again. It comes down to think about what your character is going to be and how your character is going to act, and your name should at least to me reflect the personality of the character, or at least have some factor there too. I think it makes the name more interesting, and you're going to remember your name without having to look at your sheet every time. So
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to put a little more thought into names going forward.
yeah, I've been.
You guys have
blessed.
opened my eyes.
You don't necessarily have to have it where your name directly says this about a character.
Doesn't
but
have to be
as long as
literal.
it sounds good.
Yeah.
Like Sin the Sure Shot, you can tell that he has something with hitting things from a distance.
Right.
Like Darvin Darshore Darksbane III, you can tell that he comes from a line of people that trample out evil.
Which is an absolutely fantastic paladin name, by the way. It's a
But
great name.
originally he started out as just Darvin Darshore, and as we started
Right.
playing, it's with the characters, it's something. Don't be afraid to develop the name as you go.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, the Sin the Shot, well, the Shot, the Just,
Stone Dwarf.
Stone Dwarf. These are names that we didn't have originally in the game, and really we kind of had to reach for Stone Dwarf because he didn't have anything going on for him because he just was kind of I hate to say it, he's kind of a bland character. I like Polmet a lot better. His other dwarf was Polmet, and that was a much better character.
Who became the Backbiter.
Yeah, Polmet the Backbiter. Again, that happened because something happened in game. He killed. He's the cause of the first PC death in any game I ever ran, and it was PvP. Josh Hill was playing a PC that was a wizard who cast a blindness and something else. I don't know exactly how it happened, but he ended up pissing off Jamie. And so Polmet and the rest of the party came to some kind of not real understanding, some kind of a wink nudge kind of understanding. And they split the party up to go down tunnels. And whilst they were down the tunnels, Polmet took out his axe and just cleaved the wizard in half. And when he came back to the group, it was the orcs got him. I don't know.
Again, with Jamie playing a not really good
Well, he was.
character.
I think that came down to a player not fitting in and not knowing how to be in the group, like we talked about in the last episode.
I don't remember why, but I remember the dwarf putting on like a cursed chain suit, and it started shrinking on him.
Yeah,
And he got stuck with that. And I don't remember.
I did that too, just because I was
Yeah.
being a dick.
Yeah, but I don't remember.
What? You, a dick GM? Never.
No.
I don't remember. That was, I think, before he ended up killing the
Yeah, it
wizard.
was-
But I remember, he, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why at this point, but the wizard casts like a deaf and blindness, or at least a blindness on the dwarf.
Yeah. Jamie has a tendency to lose his temper as characters. Of course, he's not the only one. Some people make magic swords to have his character killed and impale him and then diablerize him in the middle of a tarmac right before we go to fight fucking Set.
Hey, that was completely in character. You don't mind fuck a member of the party.
No, I agree. I didn't.
He basically came and he wasn't sure he could trust the new guys in the group, in quotations, the new guys in the group. And so instead of saying, hey, we're going to do this thing, you mind if I just kind of take a little peek in your mind and make sure that you're trustworthy or anything like that, he just comes up and basically rifles through my whole entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
without
get you
asking.
Yeah, they'll get you killed. That's
and-
why Jareth didn't really
And,
stop them.
Yeah, he failed. he failed his role, so I knew what he had done.
Right.
And
That was.
he mind raped my character.
What was his character's name in that?
I think his was Dimitri.
Dimitri, right,
I
right.
remember
Because
correctly.
it was Dimitri and Jareth. I played Jareth. We were crazy powerful characters in WoD, and having known Jareth knew what had happened, and I didn't end up killing them for doing it. Like, no, he needs to learn a lesson. So I went ahead with it, and then you guys Diabloized him, and then we didn't get to play anymore because I'm pretty sure Jeanette realized I was going to kill all the PCs.
Yeah,
and I probably could have.
probably, yeah, could have. I'm sure you could have.
Yeah, I was broke.
Yeah, you were broke. He was pretty broke. I had to go to an ultra powerful Tremere to have the sword made.
You plotted. It was great.
Yeah, I plotted.
It was great. You could have waited like 10 more minutes so we could have gotten on the plane and gotten to fight Set.
You did fight Set, and we beat him.
Yeah, barely. We beat him because the GM decided that it was time for Jareth to reach Golconda and move on. Whatever. Yeah, which was it was bad storytelling, but it happens. I mean, it was fun at the time, but it was like you could tell we were reaching. And there's always points in a game where you've got to be careful, and we'll get more on that in the GM episode, where you have to maintain the control. Otherwise, PCs will make decisions that will end up making their characters less fun to play in the future. You as a GM will tell a point of story that is like much less entertaining. You know, everything after that point is going to bring down the quality of the game. Or you do what I have done a couple times when you've got some PCs that want to commit seppuku, and you're like, "Oh, my bad, please don't. I'll fix it." You know, your ancestral sword breaks in the Shadowlands, and you know you're surrounded by Uni and goblins, and you're in the castle of the doomed basically, and your sword breaks, and you're like, "Okay, I got this."
Honorable death.
Honorable death.
I love that meme. If your game master screwing you in L5R, there's always an honorable way out.
Yeah, I'll have to. I think I have that on my computer. I'll have to post that in the show notes as well. Well, I think that's about it for us for today. Unless anybody else has anything they want to talk about beyond that, remember that if you have any ideas for a show that you want to hear, we've got episode or season 1 basically spelled out, but we're definitely willing to put some more stuff in there. You can email us at thequest@dancinggiraffe.net. You can also follow me on Twitter at IRNerdivore or on Facebook at IRNerdivore. Anyways, we're going to wrap up today with our final thoughts. My final thought for today is remember that your character is important. The party's integrity is important. You want to make sure that your character fits into your party, that your name helps elevate your role playing, and that you're not being a detriment to your party. Add something to the story. If you're not adding something to the story, you need to change it and help collaborate the storytelling.
Have some personality without being obnoxious.
All right. Well, that's it for us for today. We'll see you next week. We should be able to be found on iTunes, not this episode, but next episode. I've been filling everything out, doing all the paperwork and whatnot that needs to go there. So hopefully you'll find us. Otherwise, you can find us online at dancinggiraffe.net. You can also find our primary sponsor, which is Geek Fan Expo. So with that, have a good night. You've been listening to The Quest. I'm your host, Jeff Harvey, and you can follow me on Twitter at IRNerdivore. Don't forget about our friends at www.geekfanexpo.com. And for all of our friends here in the studio and all of our guests, we want to say so long and thanks for all the fish.
Baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't go back to New Orleans. You know it hurts me so. Babe, I'm way down here. You know I'm way down here. Babe, I'm way down here in a rolling fog. Baby, please don't go.